As we all know, there were many fighting games created throughout the 90s and 2000s that attempted 3D or flat out looked like copies of other games. Things such as Fighter's Destiny, Tobal No.1, and Battle Arena Toshinden. Now this got me thinking to myself, how many games were lost to time that flopped like a fish in the market and lost out to the 3D fighting game juggernauts such as Tekken, Soul Calibur, and Virtua Fighter? I took it upon myself to research these older games and how they played, how they felt, and why they fell off in the first place, which led me to quite a rabbit hole of games that I never had the chance of playing growing up, and I will be covering them in this video. My history of 3D fighting games started with the likes of Tekken 4 and Tekken 5 on the PlayStation 2, and were integral parts of my childhood. Not too much longer later, Soul Calibur 2 came into my life and was like, hey, what if everyone had a weapon and Link was in there for some reason? A few years later after that, I picked up Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution, and that was my point of no return. VF4 Evo was when I officially got caught in the rabbit hole with no actual means of getting out. It taught me discipline, honor, and frame that I had no business knowing at the age of 15. And that was the start of my downfall, because suddenly I wasn't just replaying old games. I was digging deep into the forgotten, abandoned, bizarre 3D fighters of the past. So today, I want to talk about the 3D fighting games time forgot. Let's go! If you like what you see, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on which obscure game you know about, and if you'd like me to cover it in a future video. So today, we're talking about the weird ones, the underrated ones, the ones that aged like bread, and the ones that shouldn't have existed, but I'm sure glad they did. Chapter 1. The Oddballs, the What Were They Cooking section. Fighter's Destiny for the N64.
On point one.
You know how fighting games are usually about knocking your opponent unconscious? Yeah, Fighter's Destiny looked at that and said, okay, but what if this was a figure skating competition instead? Instead of just draining a health bar, you earn points for different actions. Throws gain you 1 point, counters gain you 2 points, ring outs gain you 3 points, and KOs vary by character because sure, why not? Congratulations! You didn't win the fight, you won the performance review! And honestly, this is one of the only fighting games where you can win with either actual strategy and spacing, or absolute nonsense by panic throwing your opponent into the abyss. It's weird, it's janky, but it's also kind of genius, because it forces you to think a little differently. Do you go for safe pokes and counters? Do you fish for ring outs? Do you gamble on risky throws? Or do you just pray your character's KO point value is cracked? Surprisingly deep training modes. And here's something that genuinely surprised me. This game actually had a pretty in-depth training mode for its era. Not just your standard punch a dummy forever mode, though yes, there's that too. You also get a mid-air combo training mode where you practice juggling the dummy, a special move training mode focused on landing high-risk moves that can instantly swing or end rounds, and even a throw escape training mode dedicated purely to breaking grabs. Which, for a game of this era, that's kinda wild. Most fighters back then barely told you how the buttons even worked. This thing was out here teaching you actual mechanics and fundamentals. And here's a little fun fact I didn't believe at first either. Fighter's Destiny actually had a sequel. Fighter's Destiny 2 released also on the Nintendo 64, and then immediately vanished like it owed someone money. Like, this game dropped, blinked, and evaporated. So naturally the question is, what changed between Fighter's Destiny 1 and Fighter's Destiny 2? The sequel basically said, alright, what if we take the first game and just crank everything up by about 12% for no apparent reason? Don't ask me where I got the percentage from. Feature 1 was the addition of more characters. They added new fighters like Adriana, a judo/aerial dancing specialist, her design being obviously based on Brazil's Carnaval. A few returning characters that got glow-ups, such as Ninja. Yep, that is his name. Ryuji, who I'm pretty sure is the same character, you know, Ryu, Jin Kazama knockoff, and Mei Ling the karate girl. Zieg, a seemingly non-human character who does massive damage and has a massive life bar to boot, while also being as slow as molasses, as well as 11 other characters to choose from, along with secret characters and bosses you must unlock. It gave the roster more personality, but also more who asked for this energy. Feature 2, adjusted point values. They tweaked the scoring system. Some KOs were worthless, some throws were worth more, and certain characters got rebalanced, kind of like a balance patch in a sense. Feature 3, smoother controls. Kinda. Movement feels a bit cleaner and the inputs respond a little better, but it still has that classic N64 controller feel of trying to play a fighting game on a controller designed for aliens. Seriously, the thing looks like a really weird spaceship. Feature 4, new modes. They added extra minigames and challenges, including a strange Mario Party knockoff by the name of Fighters Arena. You spin a wheel dice thing and go around the map starting fights and causing weird events to happen, kind of like what usually goes down on a Mario Party board, which is interesting to say the least. Hey Mario, you good? Feature 5, visual upgrade. While textures and models look slightly sharper, but not enough to stop you from thinking everyone was rendered using mashed potatoes. So why did Fighters Destiny 2 disappear? Honestly, bad timing, low marketing, and the N64 was already fighting an uphill battle by that point. So by the time Fighters Destiny 2 showed up, everyone was already busy playing Smash 64, Tekken, Soul Calibur, literally anything else with bigger brand recognition. So Fighters Destiny 2 became one of those games that technically exists, but only lives in dusty rental store memories and deep YouTube rabbit holes, which is a shame. Mechanically, it was genuinely trying something different instead of copying the same formula. In summary, Fighters Destiny is weird, experimental, janky, surprisingly smart, and absolutely not afraid to break fighting game traditions. It's a game where you don't just beat your opponent, you outscore them. And even if it never caught on commercially, it deserves respect for being brave enough to ask, what if fighting games were judged like the Olympics? This one was actually supposed to be PlayStation's answer to Virtua Fighter. Weapons, flashy specials, and over-the-top posing. Now, did it age well? Absolutely not. But was it iconic at the time? Honestly, yeah. Even though it wasn't born yet when this game was out, I still hear people talk about it fondly till this day. It's that you had to be there kind of game, the early PS1 tech demo that accidentally became a franchise. What I will say though, these polygon models, whew, peak PS1 graphics right there. They look like the devs just learned what polygons were and immediately used all of them at once. This is the kind of game people remember because it was one of the first 3D fighters they ever saw. Not because it was, playable. So how does Battle Arena Toshinden actually play? Think of it as Virtua Fighter and Soul Calibur had a kid, but that kid kinda grew up clumsy.
Daddy? Next door. Jackass.
Combat is fully 3D, you can sidestep left and right, even though the sidestep looks less like calculated movement and more like dodging someone trying to hand you a flyer at the mall. Characters swing around big, impractical weapons, such as swords, whips, staffs, and even clubs if you're a caveman sort of guy like Rungo here. And the hitboxes? Sometimes they connect, sometimes they don't. It's a gamble. The strikes are flashy, dramatic, and stylish, but not exactly precise. You're not fighting so much as flailing with confidence. Each character in Battle Arena Toshinden had a total of 6 moves, including normal kick attacks, charge attacks, projectile specials, because why not, desperation moves, secret moves, and ring out setups. But here's the twist. Specials come out with Street Fighter / King of Fighters style inputs. Quarter circles, half circles, DPs, tiger knees, in a 3D fighter on a 1990s D-pad that feels like it's made of sandpaper. Just look at Duke B. Rambut's secret move, La Fin. I have never seen an input like that in a 3D fighter before. It looks weird, and it feels even worse trying to pull it off mid-match. And I swear at one point I somehow managed to pull off what I think was Aiji's secret move, and when I say the input was ridiculous, just look at it. I did it once, and I was never able to replicate it again. Pulling off that move genuinely felt like it was a myth. This is great in concept, but in practice, you can try to do a clean fireball input all you want, but what will end up happening is your character launching backwards off the stage like they suddenly forgot where they were. And another thing that's worth noting is that the control layout itself was a bit weird. Instead of a dedicated block button like some 3D fighters at the time, you had a light weapon attack, heavy weapon attack, light kick attack, and a heavy kick attack. Rather than including a traditional block button, the developers lean on the standard 2D fighting game method, holding back, which feels oddly out of place in a fully 3D arena. Okay, pause. I need to stop everything for a second, because I am just now learning that this ad exists as of recording this video, and I had to physically stop, reread it, and then read it out loud to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Let me read this for you guys. Sophia says, spend your money to reserve a Sony PlayStation. Sophia says, give the money to your local video game store and do it now. Sophia says, get on your knees and bark like a dog. Now give Sophia a kiss. She didn't say Sophia says. Now she has to hurt you. Like, this is an official PlayStation ad. Not a parody, not something someone made in Photoshop last week. This ran in magazines, in public, with Sophia from Battle Arena Toshinden standing on a PlayStation like she owns the damn thing. I had to show this to you all because there was no other way to accurately capture how viscerally confused I was when I first found it. This is peak 90s gaming marketing. Edgy, weird, wildly uncomfortable, and somehow the most accurate representation of that era imaginable. Anyways, in summary, Battle Arena Toshinden is like a time capsule in game form, with wild desperation and secret moves, exaggerated wind poses, characters dressed like they'd get kicked out of Hot Topic, 3D graphics that blew people's socks off at the time, and now iconic blocky PS1 visuals. A fun fact about this game is that it actually had 3 sequels. 3? The first game was a launch title in the US and Europe and actually sold 1.27 million copies according to VG charts. However, as you can see, as time went on, the sales dwindled and dwindled, progressively selling fewer copies, and by 1996, Battle Arena Toshinden Ura, a Japan-exclusive Saturn port of Toshinden 2, failed to leave much of an impression, effectively putting the series on ice for quite some time. It's janky, clunky, and borderline unplayable by modern standards, but was a neat novelty for the time, and I understand where its appeal came from. And speaking of early PlayStation experiments, enter Tobal No.1. Yeah, Tobal No.1 was such an early PlayStation game that people bought it purely so they could play 10 minutes of Cloud walking slowly through a Midgar reactor. But the actual game? Low-key underrated. And it's funny because most people remember this game for one thing. It came with the Final Fantasy VII demo disc. So how does Tobal No.1 actually play? This is what we would classify as a real 3D fighter. Not kinda 3D, but actually you're stuck in a lane. No, Tobal lets you move freely in 360 degrees like you're in an MMA match on Jupiter. Movement actually feels buttery smooth. Walking, for example, is simple, precise footwork that lets you control spacing and approach opponents without overcommitting. The sidestep mechanic. Full 360 degree evasion. Unlike many early 3D fighters, you could sidestep anywhere at any time, even mid-combo or during an opponent's attack, giving you incredible control over spacing and positioning. It wasn't just defensive, it opened up opportunities for counterattacks and sidestep-specific strikes. The dash mechanic. Sprinting added momentum to your movement, letting you close gaps faster, extend combos, or perform running attacks that could catch opponents off guard. Timing and distance mattered more than regular old button mashing. Hop steps. Tiny, almost goofy looking hops that were deceptively functional. They let you evade low attacks, subtly adjust your distance, and set up for follow-up strikes or grabs. They might have looked silly, but mastering them made you feel like you were dancing around your opponents. Jumping in Tobal No.1 was another unusual design choice. Instead of the typical up on the D-pad or analog stick, jumps were executed via the L1 button. It felt strange at first, especially if you were used to standard 3D fighters of the era, but it gave the game a slightly different rhythm. You could combine jumps with dashes and sidesteps in ways that felt surprisingly fluid once you got the hang of it. I'd personally still prefer a traditional jump input, but Tobal made it work in its own unique, quirky way. It's like Tekken, Virtua Fighter, and Power Stone had a polite, well-animated baby. The combat system. Tobal doesn't play like a typical arcade brawler. It feels more like a technique-first martial arts sandbox. Every decision matters, and mashing gets you nowhere fast, at least for the most part. Like in Tekken, you're constantly managing high, mid, and low attacks, which makes mix-ups and defensive reads a huge part of every exchange. On top of that, the game lets you target specific limbs. Go after the legs and you can slow an opponent's movement. Focus on the arms and their blocking and throws suddenly start to weaken. But the real star of the show is the grappling system. Throws aren't just canned animations, they're interactive mind games, so to speak. Opponents can struggle out, counter throw, or get dragged into chained holds and joint locks if you keep winning the exchange. There's even a dedicated grapple mode where players both fight for control at close range, adding strikes, repositioning, or attempting escapes. For 1996, this was absolutely wild. Outside of characters like King from Tekken or Wolf from Virtua Fighter, you just didn't see this level of wrestling depth in fighters. Movement is just as important as offense. The sidestep system is fully free form, letting you slide around attacks at almost any time, even mid-pressure, and punish overcommitments. Positioning, spacing, and angle control matter just as much as reactions, giving the game a surprisingly tactical flow. The move list itself is intentionally lean, but meaningful. These consist of strikes, clean punches, kicks, and sweeps tied closely to each character's martial art, grabs and grapple chains, short-range holds that branch into throws, locks, and extended pressure, sidestep attacks, which are built-in enters for whiff punishment and spacing control, counters, which are well-timed reversals that turn defense into momentum, and finally, special moves, practical tools that fit each character instead of flashy filler. Every move has a purpose. There's no bloated command list. You learn a compact toolkit, then spend the rest of the match mastering timing, spacing, positioning, and mind games. It's the kind of depth that sneaks up on you and then refuses to let go. Unlike most fighters where everything revolved around health bars, Tobal turned the stage itself into a win condition. Ring outs weren't rare, they were a constant threat. One bad sidestep, a mistimed dash, or getting dragged during a grapple could end a round instantly. You were always thinking, where's the edge? Can I push them toward it? Am I about to sprint myself into oblivion? It added tension to every exchange in a way some early 3D fighters never really attempted. The control scheme stayed surprisingly consistent across the roster. Instead of wildly different execution barriers, most characters share familiar inputs and system rules. The real depth came from decision making, positioning, and reads, not really memorizing a phone book of commands. Easy to pick up, brutal to master. Honestly, suspiciously modern for 1996. Hits felt heavy. Characters staggered, slid, and crumpled depending on how they were struck. Knockdowns felt earned, throws looked painful, and the visual feedback made every exchange easy to read. It wasn't very flashy, but it was grounded and physical, which somehow made the goofy characters even funnier. Toriyama's touch. And yes, the entire cast was designed by the late author Akira Toriyama of Dragon Ball and Chrono Trigger fame. Half the roster looked like they escaped from an anime tournament arc. Hardcore martial arts systems, but starring anime humans, weirdos, and robots. Somehow, it worked, and in a way that was kind of unforgettable. One thing I wanted to touch up with Tobal No.1 was actually the training mode. Tobal No.1 didn't just have a training mode, it actually displayed frame data, startup, active, and recovery frames. For a PS1 fighter in 1996, that was practically unheard of. Most games didn't even think about showing hitboxes, let alone precise numbers. Interestingly, accessing training mode wasn't very intuitive. You had to go through the options menu instead of the main menu game modes, which always struck me as a weird design choice. On top of that, the music was missing in training mode. I'm not sure if that was a quirk of the emulation or an original design decision, but it definitely felt strange while recording. And then there's the mode everyone forgets but should not, a full roguelike dungeon crawler built into a fighting game. Explore multi-floored dungeons filled with traps, monsters, and treasure, fight monsters with attack patterns that mimic actual fighting mechanics, forcing you to apply your martial arts skills in a completely different context, collect items to upgrade your character, heal, or unlock special abilities, unlock new characters by progressing deeper into the dungeon, and fight absurd bosses like giant crabs in narrow hallways, because why not? Every dungeon battle forced you to think tactically, which attacks to use, when to grapple, when to strike, and when to sidestep freely around enemies. That full 360-degree freedom of movement wasn't just for duels. It had a bit of a rough transition into exploration, making navigation and combat feel like a bit of an interconnected system. In many ways, it was a fighting game mashed with a roguelike RPG. Ambitious? Absolutely. Fun to play? Definitely. But did it age perfectly? Not quite. The mode relied heavily on platforming and switches that had to be pressed to progress through floors, mechanics that didn't always mesh smoothly with Tobal's combat-focused controls. Tobal's quest mode is so similar to Tekken's Tekken Force that both modes let you unlock characters by progressing through their challenges, like Dr. Voskanovich in Tekken and Snork, I can't believe his name is Snork, in Tobal No.1. Tekken Force handled side-scrolling action more cleanly, but it was much shorter. Tobal's quest mode, by contrast, was massive. 30 floors filled with varied layouts, puzzles, and bosses. It was an incredibly ambitious effort for a PS1 fighting game. Impressive in scope, even if some parts feel a bit clunky by today's standards. To summarize, it was ahead of its time, had fluid movement, deep systems, gorgeous art, and gameplay that still feels amazing today. And let's not forget, the character designs were done by Akira Toriyama, the man whose art shaped entire generations. Tobal No.1 is a tiny, forgotten piece of Toriyama history tucked away on the PS1. Oh, and fun fact, there was a sequel, Tobal No.2, that never left Japan. Now that is what I call highway robbery. So yeah, those were the forgotten, abandoned, and absolutely unhinged 3D fighting games of the past. Some were ambitious, some were weird, some aged like fine wine, and others aged like sliced avocado left on the kitchen counter. These games are definitely products of their era, no doubt about that, but honestly, I had way too much fun falling down this rabbit hole, because let's be real, there's a metric ton of 3D fighters out there waiting to be rediscovered and appreciated in their own beautifully janky way. And that's kind of the whole point of this video. Digging up forgotten franchises, celebrating wild experimental mechanics, embracing jank when it somehow becomes charming, and giving these weird old games a spotlight they never got. Now I want to hear from you. Which 3D fighters did you grow up with? Tekken? Soul Calibur? Tobal? Bloody Roar? Some cursed PS1 or PS2 game nobody else remembers? Drop them in the comments. Seriously, I'm fishing for ideas here. And if enough of you demand it, yeah, part 2 is absolutely happening. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, dislike, subscribe, all that good YouTube jazz. And above all, have yourselves an excellent rest of your day, and peace out, everyone.